The firelight flickers against the cavern wall, casting long, dancing shadows that seem to have a life of their own, mimicking the shapes of animals that walk in the darkness outside. And the air here is cool, carrying the scent of dry pine needles and the faint metallic tang of coming snow. You are safe here, wrapped in the heavy warmth of firs and the deep quiet of the stone, while outside, the wind moves across the vast open plains, whistling low and mournful through the tall grasses that have turned brittle with the season. Listen closely to that wind, for it is the sound of a world that is breathing, a slow and heavy respiration that takes thousands of years to complete a single inhalation. We tend to think of the ground beneath us as solid, immovable, a permanent stage for the fleeting drama of our lives. But tonight, we remember that the earth is not a statue, but a traveler, drifting through the velvet silence of space, tilting and turning in a rhythm so ancient that our bones know it better than our minds do. It is easy to imagine that the great changes of the past, the freezing of the seas, the burying of continents under miles of ice, arrived like a thunderclap, a sudden disaster that sent our ancestors scrambling for shelter as the sky turned instantly dark. We imagine this change happened suddenly, like a door slamming shut or a fire being extinguished by a bucket of water, because that is how we understand tragedy, as something that strikes, something that interrupts. But the truth is slower, quieter, and far more unsettling, for the great cold does not attack. It arrives like a guest who enters the room without a sound, standing in the corner unnoticed until you realize the temperature has dropped and the light has changed. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Settle back now and let your breathing slow down to match the flicker of the fire, for we are going to watch the seasons stretch until they break, not with a snap, but with a long, weary sigh. The sky above is clear and hard, polished by the cold, and the stars look down with a gaze that feels indifferent, yet there is a pattern in their arrangement, a celestial clockwork that ticks once every few millennia. It feels like a single moment, this night, this fire, this breath, but we are actually riding on the back of a planet that is gently rocking in its sleep, leaning away from the warmth of the sun, and then leaning back, a motion so subtle that no single lifetime could ever measure it. To the people living through it, the Ice Age does not feel like an age at all. It feels simply like a series of harsh winters, a grandfather telling his grandchildren that the snow used to melt in May, but now it lingers until June, or a hunter noticing that the herds have moved further south than they did when he was a boy. It is a creeping normalcy, a slow theft of the heat, where the summer sun feels just a little more distant, a little paler, as if it has lost its affection for the ground. There is no panic in this process, only a quiet adjustment as the forests slowly retreat, giving way to the tundra, and the rivers lock themselves away in crystal cages, waiting for a thaw that is delayed by 10,000 years. We look for a villain in this story, expecting to find a volcano that choked the sky with ash or a meteorite that struck the crust with the force of a god's hammer. But the hidden machine behind the ice is not made of fire or violence, it is made of geometry. It is the shape of an orbit, the angle of a tilt, the wobble of a spin, mathematical perfections that govern the fate of every living thing. Imagine a spinning top on a wooden floor, humming as it turns, perfectly upright at first, but then, as it slows, it begins to nod, its axis tracing a circle in the air. Our world is that top, and we are living in the wobble. The cold is born from this dance. It begins in the high north, where the sunlight strikes the earth at a slant, glancing off the white shoulders of the mountains rather than sinking into the soil. When the machine aligns just so, the summer sun is too weak to melt the snow that fell the winter before, and so the snow remains, a thin white layer that survives the solstice, welcoming the next winter's fall on top of it. Layer by layer, year by year, the ice builds its own monuments, not out of malice, but out of simple accumulation, a library of frozen water where each page is a season that forgot to warm up. We are small in this story, tiny warm specks on a surface that is deciding to sleep, And yet there is a comfort in this vastness, a realization that we do not have to control the climate or push the stars back into place. We only have to endure, to huddle closer to the fire, to tell stories while the glaciers creep forward at the speed of a growing fingernail. The silence of the prehistoric night is not empty. It is full of this heavy, waiting potential, the sense that the lever has been pulled, the gears have engaged, and the great wheel is turning, even if we cannot see it move. The air feels thicker now, charged with the static of dry snow, and the light from the fire seems to struggle against the encroaching dark, illuminating only the small circle of our existence, while the rest of the world fades into a blue-gray twilight. It is a time for listening, not to the noise of the day, but to the deep resonant hum of the planet itself, a vibration that comes up through the soles of your feet, telling you that the ground is changing, that the rocks are cooling, that the ocean is holding its breath. There is a specific kind of loneliness to the onset of an ice age, a feeling that the earth is turning its back on the sun, retreating into a private, frozen contemplation, and we are merely passengers on this journey into the shade. We walk out to the edge of the cave and look up, and the constellations seem fixed, pinned to the fabric of the night, but they too are drifting, carried by the slow procession of the axis, guiding us toward a different North Star than the one our ancestors knew. It is beautiful and terrifying, this silent mechanics, because it requires nothing from us, asks no permission, and offers no apology. It simply is, just as gravity is, just as time is. The moss on the rocks freezes, the water in the stream slows to a trickle and then stops, silenced by the frost, and the birds that used to sing here have flown to lands we have never seen, leaving behind a stillness that rings in the ears. This is how it starts, not with a shout, but with a whisper, with a single snowflake that lands on a stone and refuses to melt, followed by another and another, until the stone is gone, and then the hill is gone, and then the valley is gone, all hidden beneath a blanket of white that looks peaceful, almost innocent in the starlight. We stand on the precipice of this change, feeling the temperature drop on our skin, sensing the shift in the wind, knowing that the machine has begun its work and that for the next 100,000 years, the world will be a different place, ruled not by the heat of the sun, but by the geometry of the shadows. To step away from the hearth is to step out of a brief flickering dream and into the enduring reality of the long winter. For in this era, heat is a luxury, a fleeting treasure that must be guarded with cupped hands and huddled bodies, while the cold is the vast, immovable architecture of the world itself. We carry the memory of fire with us like a secret, a small internal sun that we hope will keep the blood moving through our veins. But the landscape around us has long since forgotten what it means to be truly warm. It drifts beyond the memory of fire, settling into a slumber so deep that the very concept of a thaw feels like a myth told by elders who have never seen the grass without its coating of frost. The air here does not merely touch the skin. It claims it, pressing against the face with a dry, invisible weight that smells of crushed rock and ancient dust, a scent that is distinct to the deep freeze, devoid of the rot and bloom of a living forest. Trees still stand, of course, but they are changed, hardened by the necessity of survival. The broad, leafy canopies of the warm times have retreated, leaving behind the dark, spiky silhouettes of spruce and pine, their needles waxy and tight, hoarding moisture against a wind that would suck the life out of anything less stubborn. These forests are quiet places, muffled by the depth of the snow, which acts as a damper on the world's noise, absorbing the snap of a twig or the call of a bird until the silence feels physical, a soft, heavy blanket that has been pulled up over the head of the earth. It seems that the planet is holding its breath, waiting for a signal that will not come for 10,000 years, and in this long pause, life slows down to match the tempo of the ice. The animals that move through this white twilight are built for the chill, draped in shaggy coats of thick matted hair that hang low to the ground, creating their own microclimates as they walk. The woolly mammoth gently brushes the snow aside with a curved tusk to find the pale, dried grasses beneath, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that suggests it has all the time in the world. There is no rushing in the ice age, for rushing burns energy, and energy is the currency of survival. To sprint is to spend what you may not be able to earn back before the sun dips below the horizon. Perhaps this is why the prehistoric world feels so majestic to our modern minds, not because it was savage, but because it was patient, governed by a stillness that we have forgotten how to inhabit. We look at the frozen waterfalls, suspended in midair like chandeliers of diamond and glass, and we see beauty, but the creatures of this time see only the state of things, the water locked away in a form that cannot be drunk, requiring them to eat the snow and melt it with their own body heat. It is a world where water is a solid, where the lakes are walkable plains, and where the ocean has pulled back from the shore, locking its liquid wealth into the great ice sheets that sit heavy on the continents, pressing the bedrock down into the mantle with their unimaginable weight. Scientists still debate exactly how quickly the ecosystem shifted, whether the forests vanished in a single human lifetime, or if they faded so gradually that a man might die in the same grove where he was born, never noticing that the saplings were fewer than before. It is likely a mix of both, a stuttering decline where the summers simply failed to arrive with their usual vigor, one after another, until the moss stopped growing and the beetles stopped humming, and the silence expanded to fill the space they left behind. To live here is to accept that the sky is a paler shade of blue, often milked over with high, thin clouds that diffuse the sunlight, casting few shadows and making the distances hard to judge. A hill might be an hour's walk away or a day's journey, hidden in the flat, confusing light of the glacial haze. The cold preserves everything it touches, halting decay, keeping the fallen log and the stricken prey in a state of suspended animation, as if time itself has frozen along with the river. We are tropical creatures, we humans, born of the savanna and the heat, and yet we wandered into this refrigerator of a world, stitching together the skins of other animals to borrow their warmth, inventing the needle, a tool as revolutionary as the wheel, though far quieter, to create a second skin that would allow us to endure the bite of the wind. We huddle together not just for affection, but for engineering, creating a shared pocket of tropical air in the center of a hut made of mammoth bone and sod, telling stories to keep the mind awake while the body craves the hibernation of the bear. There is a gentle irony in our survival here. We are the children of the sun, yet we conquered the dark by learning to carry the fire, not just in our hands, but in our imagination, remembering the green world even as the white one swallowed the horizon. The landscape looks lonely to us, stripped of the vibrant greens and yellows of a summer garden, painted instead in shades of slate, charcoal, and chalk. But to the hunter walking the ridge, this emptiness is full of signs. The track of a fox, the drag mark of a heavy tail, the dark smudge of a distant herd against the snow. It is a readable world, a manuscript written in ice, where every movement leaves a record that lasts until the next snowfall wipes the page clean. And though the cold is harsh, it is also clarifying. It strips the world down to its bones, removing the clutter of the undergrowth, revealing the sharp, jagged geometry of the mountains and the rolling curves of the valley floor. It is a world without concealment, where the breath of every living thing rises as a visible cloud, a testament to the fire burning inside the engine of the body. We drift through this pale landscape, feeling the numbness in our fingers and the sting on our cheeks, and we realize that the Ice Age is not an event that happens to the Earth, but a state of being that the Earth enters, a long meditation where the pulse slows and the fever of life breaks, leaving behind a cool, calm clarity. The memory of fire is all that separates us from the silence of the stone. We tend it carefully, feeding it dry lichen and precious wood, watching the smoke rise up to join the gray sky, a tiny signal that somewhere in this vast frozen cathedral, a heart is still beating, warm and defiant against the weight of the endless winter. The glaciers do not hate us. They simply do not know we are here, and they move with the crushing indifference of a tide made of rock and ice, reshaping the continents as they slide, grinding mountains into dust that the wind will one day carry to the sea. We are small, so very small, and the cold is so very big, stretching from the pole to the heart of Europe and North America, a kingdom of frost that feels as though it has always been here and will always remain, eternal and unchanging, drifting beyond the memory of fire into a future that is white, silent, and still. To find the source of the winter, we must lift our eyes from the snow-covered plains, past the shivering forests, and look up into the blinding white heart of the sky, where the architect of all our days and nights sits upon its throne of fire. The sun burns with a terrible and beautiful constancy, a roaring furnace suspended in the silence of the void, consuming itself to feed the planets that huddle around it, like travelers warming their hands at a campfire. We often imagine that when the ice comes, it is because the sun has grown tired, that its great golden eye has dimmed or flickered like a dying bulb in a hallway, plunging us into the shadows because it has lost its strength. It feels intuitive to blame the fire when the room grows cold, to think that the source of the heat has failed us. But the truth is far more indifferent and far more majestic. The sun has not changed. For millions of years, while Earth has frozen and thawed, while glaciers have marched and retreated, the sun has remained faithful, pouring out its energy with a steadiness that is almost impossible for us to comprehend. A river of light that flows without ceasing, without prejudice, and without pause. It does not know that we are cold. It does not know that the mammoth is walking across a frozen sea, or that the human is shivering in a cave, for it simply radiates, sending its warmth out into the darkness in every direction, a sphere of brilliance that defines the very shape of our solar system. The change lies not in the star, but in the stone that circles it. For our Earth is a wanderer, a restless planet that does not know how to sit still in the warmth. We are caught in a gravitational dance, a waltz performed on a floor of infinite black glass, and like any dancer, the Earth sometimes moves close to its partner and sometimes drifts away, caught up in the momentum of its own spin. It is a relationship defined by distance and angle, a cosmic geometry where a shift of a single percent in proximity can mean the difference between a rainforest and a tundra. The light travels toward us across 93 million miles of emptiness, a journey that takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds, crossing a silence so profound that it would crush the human ear. And when it arrives, it strikes the top of our atmosphere with the same force it had 1,000,000 years ago. Scientists call this the solar constant, a name that sounds almost reassuring, a promise that at least one thing in this chaotic universe can be relied upon, though they gently debate the tiny fluctuations that occur over decades, wondering if the sun shivers slightly in its sleep. But these shivers are too small to explain the mountains of ice that bury continents. For that, we need a grander mechanism, a shift in the very path we walk. Imagine walking in a circle around a bonfire on a dark night. If you walk a perfect circle, your face stays the same temperature, warm and flushed. But if your path becomes an oval, there will be moments when you step back into the chill, moments when the fire feels small and distant. Earth is that walker, and its path is not the perfect circle we see drawn in school textbooks, simple and round as a dinner plate. It is a dynamic, breathing shape that stretches and contracts over eons. We are currently living in a time when the path is relatively circular, keeping us at a comfortable, steady distance. But the memory of the oval is etched into the rocks. It seems unfair in a way that we should be punished for the shape of a curve, that the difference between a golden age of civilization and a dark age of ice should come down to the eccentricity of an orbit. But the universe is not built on fairness, it is built on gravity. The sun holds us, yes, but it holds us loosely, allowing the other planets, the giants like Jupiter and Saturn, to tug at us as we pass, their heavy gravity whispering to Earth, pulling it slightly off course, stretching our orbit like a rubber band. It is a tug of war played in slow motion, a game of celestial influence where the players never touch, interacting only through the invisible threads of mass and attraction. And so, the Earth wanders. It drifts, it leans, it obeys the laws of motion with a blind mechanical obedience, unaware that the slight widening of its path is causing the snow to linger in Canada, or that the gentle tilt of its axis is drying out the Sahara. We are passengers on a ship that is steering itself by the stars, and the captain is asleep at the wheel, or perhaps there is no captain at all, only the wind of gravity and the currents of momentum. There's a strange comfort in realizing that the sun is blameless, that the star we worship as the bringer of life has not abandoned us, but rather that we have simply moved to the back of the room. It reminds us that our climate is not a static setting, like the painted backdrop of a stage play, but a relationship, a dynamic exchange between the giver of energy and the receiver, and that this relationship is always in flux. We look up at the noon sky, shielding our eyes against the glare, and the sun looks exactly as it did to the Neanderthal, exactly as it did to the dinosaur, a burning hole in the fabric of the sky, hot and white and eternal. It is the only thing in the sky that hurts to look at, a reminder of its power, and yet, despite its fury, it cannot melt the ice if the earth turns a cold shoulder. We are like a person who sits further and further from the campfire and then gently complains that the wood is damp, offering a wry smile at our own foolishness for blaming the fuel when it is our position that has changed. The light falls on the ice sheets and bounces off, returning to space unused, a rejected gift, and the sun does not mind, it simply sends more. This interaction, the constant unyielding output of the star against the shifting, wobbling reception of the planet, is the engine of the climate, the heartbeat of the ages. We are suspended between the furnace and the freezer, walking a tightrope of temperature that is maintained by the speed of our orbit. If we slowed down, we would fall into the fire. If we sped up, we would fly out into the dark. But we do neither. We stay in the groove, a groove that widens and narrows over 100,000 years, a rhythm that is too slow to feel, but powerful enough to shape the destiny of every living thing. The sunlight that warms your face today is the same sunlight that failed to melt the glaciers of the past, not because it was weaker, but because it fell on a world that was moving differently, a world that was dancing to a slower, colder tune. As the Earth continues its journey around this faithful star, it carries us through the seasons of deep time, swinging us out into the cool aphelion and bringing us back to the warm perihelion, a cosmic swing set that never stops moving. The silence of space wraps around this system, holding the sun and the earth in its vacuum, a quiet container for the noise of our weather. And as we drift through this void, illuminated by the steady, unblinking gaze of our star, we begin to understand that the cold is not an enemy, but simply a measure of our distance from the hearth, a sign that we have wandered, for a little while, into the outer reaches of the circle. We are taught from a young age that the year is a circle, a perfect ring of time that closes seamlessly upon itself, bringing us back to the exact point where we began, like a finger tracing the rim of a crystal glass. It is a comforting geometry, the circle. It implies stability, repetition, and a sense of eternal return where nothing is truly lost because everything eventually comes back around. But the universe, in its vast and silent complexity, rarely deals in perfection, and the path we travel around the sun is not the flawless loop we imagine, but something more organic, more fluid, something that breathes in and out over spans of time that would turn stone to dust. This is the first and most powerful movement of the hidden machine, a slow stretching of the great circle known as eccentricity. Imagine, if you will, a rubber band lying on a table. In its natural state, it is round, relaxed, and symmetrical, but if you place a finger on either side and gently pull, the shape elongates, thinning in the middle and stretching at the ends, transforming from a circle into an oval. This is what happens to Earth's orbit, though the hands that pull upon it are not made of flesh and bone, but of gravity. We are not alone in the dark, you see. We share this solar system with giants, with the massive swirling storms of Jupiter and the ringed elegance of Saturn, planets so heavy that their gravity reaches across the millions of miles of vacuum like an invisible tide. They are the silent heavyweights of our neighborhood, and as they circle the sun in their own stately rhythms, they tug at the earth, whispering to it with the faint but persistent voice of their mass. It is a cosmic conversation that never ends, a gravitational nudge that says, "Come this way." And over thousands of years, the Earth listens. Slowly, imperceptibly, our orbit stretches. It lengthens into an ellipse, pulling us farther away from the sun during one part of the year and swinging us in closer during another, creating a path that is no longer uniform. And then, Just as slowly, the tension releases, the planets align differently, and the orbit relaxes back toward a circle. This cycle, this deep rhythmic breathing of the solar system, takes roughly 100,000 years to complete a single inhalation and exhalation. It is a heartbeat so slow that civilization has not yet lived through a fraction of a single beat. We tend to think of eccentricity as a word for an odd uncle who collects antique spoons or a neighbor who paints their house a strange color. Perhaps a gentle smile touches our lips when we think of how human language repurposes these grand concepts. But in the language of the sky, eccentricity is a measure of how far we have strayed from the center, how much we have departed from the perfect circle. When the orbit is most circular, the Earth receives a steady, consistent dose of sunlight all year round, varying little as we travel. The seasons are purely a result of our tilt, and the distance to the fire remains constant. These are the boring times, climatically speaking, the times of stability when the machine is humming quietly in the background. But when the orbit stretches, when the eccentricity is high, the game changes. Now, the Earth travels through regions of space that are significantly farther from the fire, plunging into the deep cold of the aphelion, the point of greatest distance, where the sun appears slightly smaller in the sky, a distant coin of light that offers less warmth to the waiting ground. And then, months later, we swing into the perihelion, the point of nearest approach, where we are bathed in intense radiation, closer to the furnace than before. It creates a yearly drama of distance, a pulsing of solar energy that can exaggerate the seasons or dampen them, depending on when they fall. It seems like a small thing, this shape-shifting of the path, a matter of a few % difference in distance, but in the delicate balance of a planet that teeters on the edge of freezing, a few % is everything. It is the difference between a snowbank that melts in July and one that survives until September, waiting for the fresh flakes of October to bury it. This stretching of the orbit is the bass note of the Milankovitch Cycles, the low, thrumming frequency that sets the tempo for the major ice ages. It decides the overall energy budget of the planet, determining how extreme the difference between the near sun and the far sun will be. We move through this cycle blindly, of course. No one looks up at the night sky and says, "Ah, the orbit feels particularly oval tonight." We only feel the consequences, the subtle shifts in the wind, the way the glaciers seem to take a deeper breath and expand, or the way the deserts grow a little wider. It is a reminder that we are not fixed in place, that our address in the universe is mobile. There is a profound beauty in this imperfection, a sense that the Earth is not a prisoner of a rigid track, but a dancer swaying to a complex rhythm, influenced by its siblings in the solar family. The gravity of Jupiter does not want to destroy us, nor does it want to save us. It simply interacts with us, a physical fact of the universe that connects the fate of our small, blue world to the gas giants swirling in the outer dark. It is humbling to realize that the ice sheet covering a continent might owe its existence to the position of Saturn 1,000,000 years ago, a chain of cause and effect that links the weight of a planet to the snowflake on a mammoth's eyelash. The Great Circle is a myth we tell ourselves to make sense of time, but the reality is this wandering, this drifting, this slow, elastic stretching of our journey around the star. We are currently in a phase of relatively low eccentricity, our orbit nearly circular, which is one reason why our climate has been stable enough for us to build cities and plant crops. But the memory of the oval is always there, written in the layers of sediment beneath the ocean floor. The Earth remembers when it swung far out into the cold. The rocks remember the time of the great distance. As we visualize this, we can almost feel the momentum of the planet, the heavy rolling inertia of a world that weighs 6 septillion kilograms, floating through a vacuum that offers no resistance, guided only by the invisible curvature of space-time. It is a silent flight, smooth and terrifyingly fast, yet to us, it feels like stillness. We sit in our chairs, we lie in our beds, and we feel nothing of the 67,000 miles per hour speed, nothing of the gravitational tug of war, nothing of the orbit stretching and relaxing like a slow-motion lung. We are protected by the scale of it, insulated by the sheer vastness of the time it takes for these changes to unfold. 100,000 years is a span of time that dissolves meaning, a duration that turns mountains into sand and sand into stone, and yet the cycle holds true, ticking away with the precision of a metronome set to the slowest possible speed. The machine is vast, and its gears are made of orbits, its springs made of gravity, and its pendulum is the Earth itself, swinging back and forth between the warmth and the cold, drawing a pattern in the dark that we are only just beginning to see. We are riding the curve of the ellipse now, drifting through the segment of the loop that belongs to our moment in time, unaware of the shape of the road ahead or the road behind, trusting that the gravity which holds us will not let go, even as it pulls us into the long, slow stretch of the deep winter. To speak of 100,000 years is to speak of a span of time that the human mind cannot truly hold, like trying to cup water in a sieve. It runs through our fingers, dissolving into a vague sense of forever. But for the Earth, this is merely a single beat of the heart, one full rotation of the great cycle of solitude. As the orbit stretches into that long, lonely oval, the planet enters a phase of deep isolation, drifting into the outer reaches of the solar neighborhood where the warmth of the hearth feels like a memory from a different life. This is not a darkness, exactly, but a dimming, a subtle withdrawal of the light's intensity, as if the sun has taken a single step backward into the hallway. During these periods of high eccentricity, when the Earth is at its farthest point from the star, a point astronomers call aphelion, the sunlight that reaches us is significantly weaker, diluted by the extra millions of miles it must cross. It arrives tired, spread thin, lacking the fierce biting heat that drives the summer thunderstorms or melts the winter packs. Imagine standing in a vast empty ballroom with a single fireplace burning at the far end. When you stand close, the heat flushes your cheeks, but as you walk slowly backward toward the door, the light remains visible, yet the warmth fades into the cool air of the room. This is the journey of our world during the long stretch. It is a time of cooling by degrees, a slow-motion descent into a thermal silence where the energy budget of the planet shrinks just enough to tip the scales in favor of the ice. We often think of cold as an aggressive force, a biting wind that attacks the skin, but in the context of deep space, cold is simply the absence of the conversation between the sun and the ground. It is the silence that remains when the guest stops speaking. During this 100,000-year sigh, the Earth spends thousands of years lingering in the cold part of the ellipse, and the climate responds with a sluggish, heavy inertia. It is during these long exiles that the ice sheets, which might have melted during a closer pass, find the resolve to endure. They sit heavy on the bedrock, refusing to weep their meltwater into the sea, stubborn and white and silent. There is a profound loneliness to this geometry, a sense that the planet has turned inward, wrapping itself in clouds and snow to preserve what little heat remains in its core. We might imagine that life would rage against this dying of the light, but life is quieter than that. It simply slows down, conserving, sleeping, waiting. The heartbeat of the biosphere drops to match the rhythm of the orbit. It is a time when the survival of the fittest becomes the survival of the patient. Chat Iper. We grow restless if a cloud covers the sun for a single afternoon, checking the sky with impatience as if the universe owes us a constant spotlight. Yet the Earth endures eons of this dimness without a murmur. It is a humility that is hard for us to grasp, this willingness to exist in the shadows for 1,000 human lifetimes. Scientists who study the deep past often pause here, puzzled by a mystery they call the 100,000-year problem. For while the mathematics of the orbit are clear, the reaction of the climate seems almost too strong, too dramatic for the relatively small change in sunlight. It is as if the Earth is waiting for an excuse to freeze, and this slight drift away from the fire is all the permission it needs. Perhaps the planet prefers the cold. Perhaps the warm interglacial periods we love, the times of cities and agriculture and open oceans, are the fever dreams, the anomalies, and the ice is the planet's natural resting state. It is a chilling thought that we are living in a brief, frantic interruption of a long, peaceful sleep. As the cycle progresses, the orbit slowly begins to round out again, drawn back by the complex gravity of the solar system, but the return journey is just as slow as the departure. The solitude is not broken by a sudden rescue, but by a gradual brightening, a slow increase in the daily ration of photons until, finally, the summer sun feels sharp again. But in the depths of the cycle, in the trough of the wave, the world is a place of blue shadows and hard, clear stars. The distance creates a specific quality of light, a pale platinum clarity that makes the horizon look infinite. Sounds carry further in the cold, dense air. The crack of a glacier calving miles away might sound like a pistol shot in the next room. It is a world of acoustic perfection, where the wind playing over the ridges of the ice creates a mournful music that no human ear is there to record. This is the heavy lifting of the hidden machine. It does not smash the world with hammers, it simply moves the world away from the furnace, inch by inch, mile by mile, until the cold is no longer a visitor, but a resident. We are currently living in a time of low eccentricity, a time when the circle is nearly true, and perhaps that is why we feel so disconnected from the deep rhythms of the past. We are living in the easy times, the times of proximity. We have forgotten the long walk in the dark, but the rocks remember. Deep beneath the ocean floor, in the layers of gray muck and microscopic shells, the chemical signature of that distance is recorded, a diary of the planet's isolation. It tells of a time when the oceans shrank and the dust blew across the dry continents, when the forests turned into grasslands and the grasslands turned into deserts, all because the path we walked was an oval instead of a circle. There is a strange, melancholy beauty in this, a realization that our climate, our weather, our very history is dictated by the shape of a line drawn in the emptiness of space. The 100,000 years of solitude are not empty years. They are full of the quiet work of preservation, the storing of water, the resting of the soil. It is a winter that lasts for an age, a hibernation on a planetary scale. And as we drift through this thought, allowing the mind to expand to the size of the orbit, we feel a strange kinship with this wandering rock. We, too, have our seasons of distance, our times of feeling far from the source of warmth, and perhaps we can find comfort in the knowledge that the return is inevitable. The gravity that pulls us away is the same gravity that pulls us back. The solitude is part of the cycle, not the end of the story. The machine turns, the orbit rounds, and the traveler eventually turns its face back toward the fire. But for now, in the depths of the cycle, we are far away, drifting through the quiet, cold peace of the aphelion, watching the sun from a distance, respecting the space between the god and the ground. It is a long, slow breath out, a release of heat into the void, a surrender to the geometry of the night. The stars look the same, the moon looks the same, but the earth feels different, heavier, slower, colder, a planet that has learned to live with its own company in the vast, indifferent silence of the 100,000 years. If you were to stand perfectly still on the open plain at night, looking up at the vast, star-dusted dome of the sky, you might feel a sense of profound verticality, a conviction that you are standing upright and that the ground beneath your feet is the flat, level floor of the universe. We build our houses with plumb lines and spirit levels, obsessed with the concept of straight up and down. But the planet we live on has no such obsession, for in the deep architecture of the solar system, there is no true up and there is no true down, only angles of relation to the light. This brings us to the second great movement of the hidden machine, a motion that is perhaps the most intimate of all because it governs the very personality of our seasons, the obliquity or the axial tilt. Imagine the Earth not as a static ball, but as a ship sailing through a quiet sea. A ship rarely sits perfectly flat on the water, but lists slightly to one side, leaning into the wind. Our world lists, it leans. It is tipped over relative to the path it travels around the sun, an angle of inclination that turns the globe into a dynamic canvas for the light. Currently, we lean at about 23.5 degrees, a number memorized by school children and forgotten by adults, treated as a fixed fact like the height of Everest or the depth of the Pacific. But the tilt is not fixed, it is restless. Over a cycle of roughly 41,000 years, the Earth slowly rocks back and forth, nodding its head like a drowsy passenger on a train, shifting between a shallow angle of roughly 22 degrees and a steeper angle of 24.5 degrees. It is a slow, rhythmic rocking motion, a planetary lullaby that has been playing since the moon was torn from our side billions of years ago. In fact, it is the moon, that pale, silent watcher that acts as a counterweight, gripping our equator with its gravity and preventing us from toppling over completely. Without the moon, Earth might tumble chaotically like Mars, a world with no climatic memory, but thanks to our companion, we simply rock, gentle and controlled. This rocking is the engine of seasonal contrast. When the Earth tilts deeply, leaning far over on its side, the seasons become dramatic, intense, and passionate. The summer pole bows low to the sun, bathing in 24-hour daylight and soaking up intense heat, while the winter pole hides away in a deep, prolonged darkness. High tilt creates a world of extremes, a world of shouting temperatures where the difference between January and July is sharp and violent. But when the Earth straightens up, reducing its tilt, the seasons lose their edge. The summer sun does not climb as high in the sky. The winter night does not feel as absolute. The world enters a phase of mildness, a blurring of the lines where the seasons seem to whisper rather than shout. And here lies the great paradox of the ice ages, the counterintuitive secret that Milankovitch uncovered and that historians of climate still marvel at today. We instinctively believe that ice ages are born from bitter, savage winters, that the cold must be aggressive enough to conquer the land. But the ice does not need a killer winter. It needs a forgiving summer. It needs a summer that is too weak, too cool, and too short to melt the snow that fell the winter before. Think of a patch of snow in a shaded corner of your garden. It survives not because the night is freezing, but because the day is cloudy. When the Earth's tilt is low, when we stand straighter in our orbit, the summers at the high latitudes become pale and feeble. The sun glances off the polar regions at a low angle, its heat insufficient to strip away the winter's accumulation. The snow survives July. Then it survives August. And when September comes, the fresh snow falls on top of the old, compressing it, hardening it, turning it slowly into ice. This is how the glaciers are born, not by the violence of the cold, but by the failure of the warmth. It is a gentle takeover, a victory of persistence. The 41,000-year cycle of the tilt acts as the volume knob for this process. When the tilt is decreasing, as it is now, the volume of the seasons is slowly being turned down. We are gradually moving toward a time of milder summers and milder winters, a trend that, if left to nature alone, would favor the growth of ice. It is a sobering thought to realize that the difference between a lush green Scandinavia and a mile-thick sheet of ice is a matter of just 2 degrees of inclination, a shift so slight that if you held a protractor in your hand, you would barely be able to see the difference between the 2 angles. Yet, to the climate system, this tiny geometric shift is a command, a signal to either retreat or advance. We feel this tilt in the marrow of our bones, even if we do not understand the mathematics. We feel it in the lengthening shadows of autumn, in the way the light turns golden and slants through the trees in the late afternoon. That slant is the tilt made visible. It is the signature of a planet that is leaning away from the fire. In the depths of prehistoric time, when humans were huddled in rock shelters, painting animals on the walls by the light of flickering tallow lamps, they were living through the turns of this great axis. They would not have known that the star they worshipped was climbing a different path across the sky than it had for their ancestors, but they would have felt the consequences. They would have known that the herds were moving, that the berries were ripening later, that the river remained frozen for longer. They were the witnesses to the rocking of the cradle. There is a gentleness to this mechanism, a lack of malice in the physics of the spin. The Earth is not trying to freeze us out. It is simply shifting its posture, adjusting its weight as it spins in the void. It reminds us that stability is an illusion, that everything we consider permanent, the climate of our homeland, the rhythm of the harvest, the very constellations we steer by, is in motion. We are riding on a gyroscope that is slowing down, nodding off, and waking up over and over again. The tipping point is not a sudden cliff edge, but a slow curve, a transition as smooth as the changing of the tides. As we visualize the planet in this section of the story, let us see it as a spinning top on a polished floor, humming quietly, its axis tracing a tiny circle in the air. It leans into the darkness, and the ice advances. It leans into the light, and the ice retreats. It is a dance of shadows played out on the surface of a sphere, where the angle of the sun determines the fate of civilizations. The tilt is the heartbeat of the seasons, the pulse that drives the circulation of the atmosphere and the flow of the oceans. And as we drift deeper into this knowledge, we can almost feel the floor tilting beneath us, a slow, oceanic sway that rocks the continents to sleep. It is a movement of immense power, delivered with infinite delicacy. A reminder that the biggest changes often come from the smallest shifts in perspective. The axis tips, the sun drops, and the ice waits, patient and eternal, for the summer to lose its fire. We are safe here, in the hold of the ship, listening to the creaking of the timbers as the vessel leans into the turn, carrying us through the 41,000-year swell of the deep-time sea. There is a specific kind of melancholy to a summer that refuses to begin, a quiet heartbreak felt not just by the human heart, which longs for the sun on bare skin, but by the land itself, which waits for a liberation that never comes. We have spoken of the tilt and the wobble, the great celestial mechanics that set the stage. But the drama of the Ice Age truly begins in this season of failure, this moment when the summer loses its ancient heat and becomes merely a brighter version of winter. It is here, in the long, pale days of the high latitudes, that the battle for the planet is won or lost, and it is won by the stubbornness of the snow. We tend to imagine that a glacier begins with a blizzard, with a sky that pours down white fury until the world is buried, but that is too loud, too sudden for the patience of the hidden machine. The birth of an ice sheet is far more subtle. It begins with a patch of white in the shadow of a northern valley, a drift of snow that fell in January and is still there in June, shielded from the weak sun by the angle of the hill. You walk past it in the spring, expecting it to shrink and vanish into the black earth, feeding the stream with its meltwater, but the days lengthen and the air warms, and still the patch remains. It shrinks perhaps, retreating at the edges, dirty and crusted with dust, but it does not disappear. July comes, with its promise of heat, but the tilt of the earth is shallow, and the orbit is distant, and the sun simply lacks the authority to banish the cold. The patch of snow survives the solstice. It sits there like a white scar on the green skin of the tundra, a silent defiance against the season. And then, August turns to September, the light begins to fail, and the first flakes of the new winter begin to drift down, settling gently onto the old snow, burying it, sealing it, locking it away. This is the moment the door closes. The snow from the previous year has now become something else. It has become history, a layer of time that will not see the sky again for 10,000 years. This process is known to glaciators as insolation failure, a clinical term for a poetic tragedy, and it focuses intensely on a specific band of the globe, roughly 65 degrees north latitude. This is the critical zone, the collar of land that circles the Arctic Ocean, the testing ground where the strength of the summer is measured against the endurance of the winter. If the summer is strong here, the ice retreats. If the summer is weak, the ice anchors itself and begins to grow. It is a game of margins, of tiny surpluses and deficits in the energy budget of the soil. When the summer heat fails, the landscape enters a state of confusion. The wildflowers that should have bloomed in the valley floor find themselves trapped beneath a ceiling of ice, their seeds dormant, waiting for a signal that has been delayed indefinitely. The animals, too, are puzzled by this shift. The herds of reindeer and caribou arrive at their summer grazing grounds only to find the grass locked away, forcing them to wander further, searching for green in a world that is turning white. It is a slow suffocation of the warm season, a squeezing out of the time required for life to flourish. The air in these lost summers feels thin and crisp, lacking the heavy, humid drowsings of a true July. There is no buzzing of insects, no heat shimmer rising from the rocks, only a clear, cold stillness that smells of ozone and wet stone. The light is beautiful, certainly, a pearl-gray luminescence that turns the remaining ice into jewels of blue and turquoise. But it is a beauty without warmth, a gallery of frozen art that warns the observer not to touch. As the years pass, the patches of surviving snow begin to merge, linking arms across the valleys, filling the hollows, smoothing out the roughness of the terrain until the land is hidden beneath a unifying blanket of white. The weight of this accumulation begins to press down, squeezing the air out of the snowflakes, transforming delicate crystals into hard, dense pellets called firn, and eventually into solid glacial ice, a substance as hard as rock and as heavy as iron. This is how the continent sinks, not by catastrophe, but by the burden of its own neglected seasons. Historians and scientists sometimes gently debate just how many cool summers it takes to trigger the irreversible slide. Is it 50 years? 500? Or does the atmosphere react faster, sensing the change in the surface and amplifying the cooling through clouds and currents? It seems likely that once the process begins, it feeds itself, for snow is selfish. It reflects the sunlight that would otherwise warm the ground, sending the energy back into space and cooling the air even further, ensuring that the next summer will be even weaker than the last. It is a feedback loop, a spiral into the cold that starts with a single drift refusing to melt. We can imagine a hunter standing on a ridge in one of these ancient summers, looking out over a valley that was green in his grandfather's stories, but is now a river of white, wondering why the sun has lost its touch. He would not know about the eccentricity or the obliquity. He would only know that the world feels older, tired, as if the fire in the earth's belly has gone out. There is a profound stillness in a landscape where the snow never leaves, a silence that absorbs the wind and the voice, creating a sense of sacred isolation. The water cycle, usually so active and fluid, slows to a crawl. The moisture that evaporates from the ocean falls as snow and stays there, removed from circulation, hoarding the world's water in great frozen banks. The sea levels begin to drop, imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably, as the ocean surrenders its liquid to the ice. It is a theft of water, a hoarding of the blue gold, orchestrated by the weak summer sun. The heat of the summer is not just a temperature. It is a force of liberation, a key that unlocks the water from its crystal prison, and when that key is lost, the prison expands. We are lucky in our current time to live in a world where the summer always wins, where the snow eventually retreats to the mountaintops, conceding the valleys to the grass and the trees. We take this victory for granted, assuming that the green will always return, but the history of the planet tells us that the green is fragile, a temporary tenant in a house built by ice. The hidden machine does not need to destroy the world to change it. It only needs to dim the lights for a few months each year, to weaken the season of growth just enough so that the season of sleep can take over. The endurance of the snow is the first sign of the deep winter, the white flag that does not signal surrender, but conquest. And so, the summer fades, not with a bang, but with a shiver, retreating into a memory, leaving behind a world where the white patches grow and connect, stitching together a shroud that will cover the face of the earth for an age. The sun still rises, the earth still spins, but the balance has tipped, and the warmth that used to define the middle of the year has become a ghost, haunting the edges of the ice but unable to break through, leaving the world to drift deeper into the cool, silent waiting of the glacial dawn. If you were to lie on your back in the wet grass of a prehistoric summer and stare up at the night sky for an eternity, watching the constellations wheel overhead like a silent, diamond-studded mechanism, you would eventually notice that the sky itself is unmoored, that the very pivot point of the heavens is drifting. We are accustomed to finding the North Star, Polaris, and pinning our sense of direction to it, treating it as the one unmoving nail in the spinning vault of the dark, a celestial lighthouse that guides our ships and our souls home. But the hidden machine has a third movement, perhaps the most subtle and poetic of them all, which reveals that even the North Star is a temporary appointment, a monarch whose reign is destined to end. This is the wobble of the spinning top, the phenomenon known to science as axial precession. To understand it, we must close our eyes and imagine a child's toy, a colorful top spun on a wooden floor. At first, it spins fast and stands straight, but as gravity pulls at it, the stem of the top begins to trace a slow, lazy circle in the air, leaning out and rolling around an invisible cone of space. Our Earth does exactly this. It is not a perfect sphere, but bulges slightly at the equator, a spare tire of rock and water caused by the centrifugal force of its daily rotation, and the gravity of the sun and moon pulls on this bulge, trying to straighten the Earth up. But the Earth is stubborn. It keeps spinning, and the result of this tug-of-war is a slow, gyrating wobble that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete a single loop. It is a cycle so long that human history is merely a brief flicker on its timeline, yet it changes the entire architecture of the night. Today, our axis points faithfully toward Polaris, but 5,000 years ago, when the pyramids were being raised from the sand, the axis pointed toward a star called Thuban in the constellation Draco. And 12,000 years from now, our descendants, if they are still watching, will look up to find the brilliant blue-white star Vega serving as the pole star, casting a colder, sharper light on the northern snows. It is a disorienting thought, like waking up in a familiar room to find the windows have moved to a different wall, reminding us that there is no true north in the universe, only the direction we happen to be facing at the moment. We place so much trust in the sky, assuming it is a fixed map, but the map is fluid, drawn in disappearing ink. This wobble does more than just rearrange the furniture of the stars. It fundamentally alters the relationship between the seasons and the orbit. Because the axis is moving, the timing of the seasons slowly drifts against the backdrop of the calendar. Currently, the northern hemisphere leans toward the sun, giving us our summer, when the Earth is far away in its orbit, near the aphelion. This distance keeps our northern summers relatively mild, tempering the heat. But as the top wobbles, there comes a time, roughly every 11,000 years, when the alignment flips. The axis will point toward the sun just as the Earth swings closest to the furnace. When this happens, the mild summer vanishes, replaced by a season of intense, scorching heat, fueled by both the tilt and the proximity. It is a super summer, a time when the ice sheets weep uncontrollably and the forests march rapidly northward, reclaiming the land from the frost. Conversely, when the wobble aligns the winter with the furthest point of the orbit, the cold becomes deep and hollow, a darkness that feels as though it will never lift. It is the precession that determines the mood of the sunlight, the quality of the energy that arrives at the top of the atmosphere. We might imagine the Earth as a sleeper, tossing and turning in bed, trying to find the cool side of the pillow, and with every turn, the climate shifts. The ancients sensed this movement, though they lacked the mathematics to describe it. They spoke of the Great Year, a massive cycle of time that dwarfed human generations, a sense that the universe was breathing in a rhythm too slow to count. There is a quiet humility in realizing that our calendar, with its fixed dates for solstices and equinoxes, is sliding slowly backward through the zodiac, that the first day of spring is a moving target in the deep time of the cosmos. The wobble ensures that no climate state is permanent. Even if the eccentricity and the tilt were frozen in place, the precession would still force the world to change, rotating the seasons through the different intensities of the orbit. It is the clock hand of the ice ages, the ticking mechanism that decides when the ice can grow and when it must retreat. To live through a full cycle of precession would be to watch the sky change its religion, abandoning one pole star for another, watching the constellations drift like ships on a dark ocean, and feeling the character of the seasons transform from gentle whispers to shouting extremes. It creates a rhythm of roughly 23,000 years within the climate record, a precessional beat that pulses in the layers of the ice cores and the sediments of the deep sea. It is a beat that says, change is coming, change is coming. We feel small against this motion, for we cannot stop the top from wobbling, we can only ride it. The sensation is not one of dizziness, for the motion is too slow for the inner ear, but rather a vertigo of the soul, a realization that our planet is untethered, dancing a solo in the dark to a music we cannot hear. The axis traces its circle, pointing now to the dark void, now to a bright star, and the glaciers down below respond with the slow, grinding obedience of ice. It is a mechanism of beautiful, terrifying precision, a reminder that the stability we crave is impossible on a spinning ball that is being tugged by the moon. The fixed stars are a lie we tell ourselves to feel safe, a comforting fiction for the short-sighted. In reality, the sky is a carousel, and we are riding one of the painted horses, going up and down, round and round, watching the universe blur past us in a stream of light and shadow. The wobble continues even now as you sleep. The axis is shifting, imperceptibly, moving away from Polaris, carrying our winters and summers toward a new alignment, a new destiny in the cycle of the ages. The machine does not rest. It spins, and in its spinning, it weaves the tapestry of the climate, threading the cold and the warm together in a complex, knotty pattern that covers the world. We are simply the moths resting on the fabric, feeling the vibration of the loom, wondering why the pattern is changing, why the light is shifting, why the North Star is slowly, ever so slowly, walking away from the pole. We measure our lives by the calendar, trusting that January belongs to the snow and July belongs to the heat, assuming that these months are fixed containers of time that sit motionless on the shelf of the year. But in the deep, silent mechanics of the solar system, the calendar is not a static thing. It is a traveler, a ghost that wanders along the elliptical track of our orbit, drifting slowly through the void. This is the consequence of the wobble, the result of that spinning top leaning into the dark. The seasons themselves detach from their familiar places in space and begin to slide. It is a concept that feels almost dreamlike, the idea that winter is not a fixed date, but a location on the orbital path, and that this location is moving. Imagine for a moment that the Earth's orbit is a great circular railway track laid down in the blackness of space, with the sun burning in the center. On this track, there are stations, one marked solstice, one marked equinox. We assume these stations are built of stone, cemented forever at specific mile markers. But the wobble of the axis uproots these stations and pushes them backward along the rails. Slowly, inexorably, the moment of the winter solstice slides along the curve. It drifts from the section of the track where the Earth is closest to the fire, moving steadily toward the section where the track loops far out into the cold. This is the drift of seasons across the void, a migration of the calendar that takes 23,000 years to circle the track. It means that the relationship between when we are and where we are is always changing. There was a time, thousands of years ago, when the northern hemisphere's winter arrived just as the Earth was swinging through its closest approach to the sun. In that era, the proximity to the furnace took the bite out of the frost. The winters were short and mild, tempered by the closeness of the star. But the machine kept turning. The wobble shifted the axis. The station moved. Today, we are drifting toward a different alignment. Now, winter in the north occurs when we are closest to the sun, which seems paradoxical. Yet, it is the only thing keeping our modern winters from being even colder. But imagine the future, or the deep past, when the drift carries the northern winter to the far end of the ellipse, to the lonely aphelion. In that alignment, the northern world leans away from the sun at the exact moment the planet is farthest from the heat. The two distances combine. The tilt says cold, and the orbit says far. The result is a winter of profound depth, a hollow, ringing freeze that freezes the sea to the bottom and thickens the ice sheets until they groan under their own weight. This drifting of the seasons creates a slow, rhythmic pulse in the climate, a beat that determines whether the solar energy is concentrated or spread thin. It is strange to think that the date on a calendar is merely a human invention, a net we throw over a fluid reality. To the planet, there is no January, no June. There is only the angle of the light and the distance to the source. The Earth does not know it is winter, it only knows it is leaning. And because of the precession, the leaning time happens at a different point in space for every generation of the ice. We are like passengers on a train who look out the window and expect to see the same mountain at 6 p.m. every day, only to realize that the schedule is slipping, that 6 p.m. now finds us in the middle of a dark tunnel. The landscape of time is shifting around us. This movement explains why the Sahara was once a green and verdant paradise, filled with lakes and hippopotamuses, painted by ancient artists on rocks that are now surrounded by dunes. It was not magic that turned the desert green. It was the drift. The summer solstice drifted into the perihelion, the point of closest approach, and the sudden intensity of the solar heat pulled the monsoon rains northward, soaking the sand and waking the sleeping seeds. Then, the cycle turned. The summer drifted away from the heat, the rains failed, and the sand returned. The desert breathes in and out, green to yellow, wet to dry, in time with the wobble of the pole. It is a majestic, terrifying slowness. We look at the ruins of past civilizations and wonder why they fell, often blaming war or famine. But sometimes, it is simply that the sky moved on. The rain belt shifted. The growing season migrated. The calendar slid a few degrees along the orbit, and the world that supported a kingdom simply ceased to exist. There is no malice in this, only geometry. The earth is impartial. It carries the seasons like a lantern, shedding light now here, now there, as it walks its lonely path. To fall asleep thinking of this is to release the need for permanence, to accept that the climate of our home is a temporary arrangement, a coincidence of angle and orbit that will not last. The interglacial we enjoy, this warm, stable pause, is just a moment when the drift is in our favor. We are currently in a good alignment, but the station is still moving. The rails are still humming. The winter is still sliding, inch by inch, year by year, toward a new rendezvous with the dark. It creates a feeling of being unmoored, of floating in a vessel that has no anchor, but there is also a kind of freedom in it. We are not trapped in a static loop. We are on a journey. The winter of 10,000 years ago is not the winter of today, and the summer of the future will be a stranger to us. The light that falls on your face tomorrow morning is unique, a specific combination of tilt, distance, and wobble that has never happened before in exactly this way, and will never happen again. The universe does not repeat itself. It rhymes, it spirals, it drifts, and we drift with it. Small, warm sparks of consciousness riding the back of a planet that is slowly turning its face toward a new season, a new position in the void, where the stars look down with the same cold, beautiful indifference, watching the seasons march around the sun like pilgrims who never reach their destination, but simply keep walking forever and ever through the silence of the endless night. Individually, these movements are gentle things, subtle shifts in the planetary posture that might pass unnoticed by a casual observer of the sky, like a clock ticking quietly in an empty room or a shadow lengthening by a fraction of an inch on a sundial. The stretching of the orbit, the nodding of the axis, the wobble of the spin, each on its own is a soft influence, a whisper of change that can be countered by the warmth of an ocean current or the breath of a trade wind. Often they work against one another, a cosmic system of checks and balances where a high tilt might be softened by a circular orbit, or a distant summer might be saved by a shift in the wobble, keeping the climate in a state of restless but manageable equilibrium. But time is long and probability is patient, and eventually the great wheel of the calendar turns to a point where the numbers align, where the tumblers of the combination lock fall into place with a silence that is heavier than any noise. This is the moment of synchronization, the alignment of the three silent gears when the machinery of the solar system conspires to shut the door against the heat. It does not happen often, perhaps once every 100,000 years, but when it does, the effect is absolute. Imagine the gears of a vast invisible clock tower, usually spinning at different speeds, suddenly clicking into a unified rhythm, driving the hands toward a midnight that will last for millennia. First, the eccentricity stretches the orbit to its limit, pulling the Earth far away from the Sun, creating a deep elliptical path that widens the gulf between the planet and the fire. The energy budget is cut, the distance is maximized, then the tilt drops low, the axis straightening up to reduce the contrast of the seasons, stripping the summer of its intensity and robbing the high latitudes of the direct, piercing sunlight needed to melt the snow. And finally, the wobble, the trickster of the system, rotates the calendar until the northern summer falls exactly at the point of greatest distance, the aphelion. The trap is sprung. The northern hemisphere, where the great landmasses lie waiting to support the ice, is now subjected to a summer that is distant, tilted away, and fundamentally weak. It is a perfect storm of cooling, though storm implies violence, and this is the opposite of violence. It is a withdrawal, a passive, coordinated retreat of every force that sustains the warmth. The sun is far, the angle is shallow, and the timing is wrong. It is as if the planet has been stripped of its defenses one by one, leaving the northern valleys exposed to the creeping ambition of the frost. In this alignment, the snow does not have to fight to survive. The victory is handed to it by the geometry of space. The white patches on the hillsides look up at a sun that is small and pale, a star that lacks the reach to touch them, and so they remain, turning into the hard, blue heart of a glacier. Historians of climate sometimes refer to this as the orbital minimum, a clinical phrase that hides the profound drama of a world losing its fire, but to the imagination, it feels like an eclipse that moves in slow motion, a shadow that falls across the epoch rather than the afternoon. There is a sense of inevitability to this locking of the gears, a feeling that the Earth is obeying a command written into its very mass and momentum. We can imagine the silence of this era, a silence that is different from the usual quiet of the wild. It is the silence of a stopped engine, of a room where the conversation has died away. The feedback loops we spoke of earlier, the reflection of the light, the cooling of the seas, now have free rein, pushed by an orbital shove that is too powerful to resist. The oceans, deprived of the summer heat, begin to surrender their carbon to the deep, pulling the blanket of the atmosphere tighter, thinning the greenhouse effect until the air itself grows clearer and colder. It is a conspiracy of physics, a cascading failure of the warmth that begins in the abstract math of the heavens and ends in the physical reality of a mile-thick sheet of ice crushing the forests of Europe. It seems almost impossible that such a precise alignment could occur by chance, yet it is not chance. It is the inevitable mathematics of cycles that run on different clocks. Just as the hands of a clock will eventually overlap, so too must the orbital parameters overlap to create the deep freeze. And when they do, the Earth enters a state of deep hibernation, a glacial maximum, where the ice is the dominant feature of the map. We might wonder if the life on the surface feels this alignment, if the animals sense that the rules of the game have changed. Perhaps there is a heaviness in the air, a subtle shift in the light spectrum, a feeling that the sun has grown indifferent. The hidden machine is no longer hidden. It is fully engaged, its gears meshing to drive the temperature down, 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 until the planet looks less like a garden and more like a marble of white swirl and blue ocean. We are currently living in a time where the gears are scattered, where the alignment is broken and the warmth is allowed to flourish. But the gears are still turning. They are always turning. The alignment of the past is a promise of the alignment of the future, a reminder that the door is not nailed shut, but only closed for the moment. The lock of the Ice Age is a combination lock, and the combination is written in the movement of the sphere. As we drift through this section of the story, let us visualize the three cycles not as lines on a graph, but as waves on the sea. Usually they are choppy and chaotic, canceling each other out, but every so often, The crests of the waves align to form a rogue wave, a towering wall of water, or in this case, a towering wall of ice that sweeps everything before it. It is a moment of supreme order, a terrible perfection where the universe demonstrates the power of resonance. The earth does not scream as the ice takes over. It simply accepts the logic of the position, yielding to the cold because the geometry allows no other outcome. The sun shines on, the stars watch, and the planet spins. But the angle is wrong, the distance is too great, and the summer has been exiled to the other side of the calendar. The gears have clicked, the door is locked, and inside the house of the world, the fire is burning low, waiting for the great wheel to turn again, waiting for the tumbler to fall, waiting for the alignment to break and let the summer back in. But for now, and for thousands of years to come, the gears hold fast, gripping the world in the tight, frozen embrace of the perfect alignment. When the gears of the sky have locked into their cold alignment and the first great sheets of ice have claimed the high ground, the nature of the planet begins to change in a fundamental way, shifting from a world that drinks in the sunlight to a world that rejects it. This is the moment when the earth unfolds the mirror, a vast, blinding surface of white that stretches across the continents and the polar seas, turning the face of the planet into a shield against the stars. We call this the albedo effect, a word derived from the Latin for whiteness, but to the climate system, it is a refusal, a stubborn denial of the warmth that is offered by the sun. In the green and blue times, the times of forests and open oceans, the earth is a dark place, a sponge that soaks up the solar energy with greed and gratitude. The deep blue of the Atlantic, the emerald canopy of the Amazon, the rich brown of the soil, these are colors that absorb heat, holding the sun's fire within the atmosphere, warming the winds and keeping the frost at bay. But ice is different. Ice is the color of rejection. When the sunlight, having traveled 93 million miles through the empty dark, finally strikes the surface of a glacier or a snow-covered plain, it finds no purchase, no place to sink its energy. Instead, it is bounced back, reflected instantly toward the sky, returning to the void almost as pure and unused as when it arrived. It is a rejected gift, a package returned to the sender without ever being opened. And this rejection creates a paradox. The sun may be shining brightly, the sky may be a piercing, cloudless blue, but the ground remains freezing because the energy is simply passing through, touching the surface but not warming it. It is like standing in front of a mirror in a cold room. The mirror reflects the light of the fire, but it does not hold the heat. As the ice sheets expand, driven by the orbital cycles we have watched turn, they increase the surface area of this mirror. Every mile of forest that is buried under snow is a mile of heat-absorbing land lost to the heat-reflecting ice. It is a self-amplifying cycle, a feedback loop of terrifying simplicity. The more ice there is, the more sunlight is reflected. The more sunlight is reflected, the colder the planet becomes. And the colder the planet becomes, the easier it is for the ice to grow even further. It is a runaway train moving in slow motion, a mechanism that takes the initial nudge of the Milankovitch cycles, the tilt, the wobble, the orbit, and magnifies it 1,000 times. The orbital changes alone are gentle, subtle pushes that should theoretically only cool the planet by a degree or two. But the mirror amplifies that silence, turning a whisper of cooling into a shout of freezing. It effectively disconnects the surface of the Earth from the power of the star. We can imagine the view from space during these times, watching the white cap of the north grow larger and larger, expanding like a splash of white paint spilling slowly down the globe, covering Canada, Scandinavia, Russia, and reaching its cold fingers into the heart of Europe and America. To an observer on the moon, the Earth would appear brighter, a dazzling, glittering jewel of frost, but to the life on the surface, this brightness is a trap. The light is everywhere, blinding, searing, reflecting off the snow with such intensity that it burns the eyes. But the warmth is gone. It is a cold light, a luminescence without comfort. In this world of high albedo, the air itself changes character. Deprived of the heat rising from the ground, The atmosphere grows heavy and stable, sinking down to press against the ice. The winds that blow over these regions are katabatic winds, gravity-driven rivers of air that pour down the slopes of the glaciers, scoured clean of moisture, screaming silently across the barren plains. They are the breath of the mirror, cold and dry and relentless. Scientists who study the energy balance of the prehistoric world often marvel at the switch-like nature of snow. A landscape can be dark and absorbent one day, and then, after a single heavy snowfall, it becomes a reflector that changes the thermal destiny of the entire region. It is a tipping point that rests on the fragility of a snowflake. If the snow melts, the dark ground returns and the heat builds. If the snow stays, the mirror holds and the cold deepens. During the depths of the Ice Age, this battle is fought and lost over and over again at the southern edges of the ice sheets, where the dirty melting margins struggle against the encroaching white. But in the heart of the ice, there is no struggle, only the absolute victory of the reflection. The sun strikes the ice, and the ice sends the sun away. It is a lonely dynamic, a refusal of relationship. We might think of the ice as a shield protecting the Earth's sleep, ensuring that the slumber is not disturbed by the intrusion of the heat. It preserves the cold by rejecting the remedy. There is a purity to this mechanism that is almost aesthetic. It reduces the complex chaos of the climate to a simple binary of black and white, absorb or reflect, heat or cold. The hidden machine has built a fortress of solitude out of frozen water, and the walls of this fortress are made of light itself. We walk through this blinding landscape in our imagination, squinting against the glare, feeling the strangeness of a sun that illuminates but does not warm, realizing that we are standing on a planet that has decided to close its eyes. The heat that should have grown a tree or warmed a river is now racing back out past the moon, lost to us, leaving behind a world that is beautiful, still, and perfectly, mathematically cold. The mirror is not active. It does not hate the sun or the life that shivers in the valleys. It simply is. It is a property of the water molecule when it aligns into a crystal, a physical law that dictates that white repels heat. But on a planetary scale, this law becomes a destiny. It ensures that once the ice age begins, it is hard to stop. It creates a momentum of cold that can override the subtle shifts of the orbit for thousands of years, keeping the world frozen even when the sun tries to return. The ice creates its own weather, its own climate, its own reality. It is a sovereign state of white, ruling over the northern hemisphere with a cold, reflective indifference. And so, the world waits, trapped behind the glass of the mirror, waiting for the day when the orbital fires will burn hot enough to shatter the reflection, to melt the shield, and to reveal the dark, hungry earth beneath, ready once again to drink the light and wake from the long white dream of the glaciated age. Beneath the blinding white shield of the ice mirror, where the wind scours the frozen plains and the sun finds no purchase, lies a world of even deeper silence and profounder weight, the ancient brooding body of the global ocean. We often think of the sea as a creature of the surface, defined by the crashing of waves against the shore or the glitter of sunlight on the blue horizon. But these are merely the skin of the beast, the shallowest expressions of a power that moves in the crushing darkness of the abyss. In the warm times, the ocean is a restless traveler, a liquid engine that tirelessly ferries heat from the equator to the poles, carrying the fire of the tropics in a massive, invisible river known as the Great Conveyor Belt. This current is the heartbeat of the climate, a slow, steady pulse that warms the winters of the north and ventilates the deeps of the south, keeping the planet's temperature in a gentle, livable balance. But as the Milankovitch cycles align and the ice sheets begin to conquer the land, this great aquatic heart begins to falter, its rhythm slowing until it resembles the heavy, paused breathing of a sleeper deep in a dream. The mechanism of this slowing is hidden in the chemistry of the water itself, in the delicate interplay of salt and cold. In the active interglacial ocean, the ocean we know, the water in the far North Atlantic cools rapidly, becoming dense and heavy with salt, and sinks violently to the bottom, pulling warm surface water up to replace it. It is a pump, a vertical lung that allows the ocean to breathe. But when the ice age takes hold, the rules of the water change. The growing ice sheets lock away the fresh water, and the sea ice expands across the churning surface of the north, placing a lid on the ocean's chimney. The pump loses its power. The sinking slows. The warm water from the south, sensing that there is no vacancy in the north, turns back or cools long before it reaches the high latitudes, leaving the polar regions to their isolation. The river within the sea begins to meander, to weaken, to drag its feet. This is the heavy breath of the sleeping ocean, a transition from a vigorous circulation to a sluggish, stratified stillness where the deep waters are cut off from the sky for thousands of years. We can imagine descending into this prehistoric abyss, sinking past the light zone, past the twilight zone, into the midnight zone, where the pressure is strong enough to crush bone to dust. Here, in the absolute blackness, the water is not just cold. It is ancient. It is water that sank from the surface centuries ago and has been drifting in the dark ever since, moving at a pace so slow that it defies human comprehension, a literal glacial pace, though it is liquid. In this dormant ocean, the layers of the sea stop mixing. The cold, dense water sits at the bottom like a heavy sediment, trapping the chill of the past, refusing to share its secrets with the air above. It becomes a cold storage vault, a planetary cellar where the Earth hoards its lowest temperatures. This stratification is a crucial part of the feedback loop. Just as the mirror above reflects the heat, the stagnant ocean below refuses to release it. The warmth that might have been stored in the tropics stays in the tropics or is lost to the atmosphere, while the poles are left to shiver in a thermal quarantine. The ocean, effectively, stops talking to the atmosphere. They divorce. The air goes its way, growing colder and drier, and the sea goes its way, growing stiller and quieter. It is a profound decoupling of the two great fluid systems of the planet. Scientists still debate the exact choreography of this shutdown. Did the current stop completely, or did it merely shift its location, diving to a shallower depth? But the emotional truth remains the same. The circulation that connects the world was broken. The nutrients that usually ride the upwelling currents to the surface, feeding the plankton and the whales, remained trapped in the dark. The biological clock of the sea slowed down. The marine snow, the tiny flakes of organic matter falling from the surface, drifted down into a stillness so absolute that a single particle might take months to reach the floor. To fall asleep visualizing this is to feel the weight of a heavy blanket being pulled up over the world. The ocean is the planet's thermal inertia, its memory of heat, and when that memory fades, the cold becomes the only reality. The Atlantic, usually the most boisterous of oceans, becomes a quiet, icy pond on a continental scale. The Gulf Stream, that famous bringer of mild weather, pulls back its favor, retreating south, leaving Europe to face the full fury of the glacial wind without a buffer. It is a betrayal by the water, a withdrawal of the warmth that usually acts as a shield against the Arctic night. And yet, there is a peace in this slowing, a sense of the planet conserving its energy, entering a state of metabolic rest. The currents do not stop entirely. Nothing in nature ever truly stops, but they move with the lethargy of a hibernation, dragging their heavy, salty limbs through the deep trenches, sliding over the abyssal plains in a somnambulist trance. This slowing down is the ocean's way of sinking with the ice. The solid water on the land and the liquid water in the sea come to an agreement, a pact of stillness. The roaring waves of the surface are silenced by the sea ice. The churning mixing of the depths is silenced by the density barriers. The entire system settles into a low-energy state, a deep resonant hum of cold that vibrates through the bedrock. We are small, warm creatures dependent on the flow of things, the flow of blood, of air, of seasons. So this image of a stagnant, heavy ocean is unsettling, yet it is also majestic in its stability. It reminds us that the earth is capable of waiting for durations that would wither a civilization to dust. The sleeping ocean holds the cold in its belly, storing it away, creating a reservoir of low temperature that anchors the climate in the ice age. It acts as the thermal ballast, ensuring that the world cannot warm up quickly even if the sun brightens for a moment. The deep water must be warmed, the pump must be restarted, the circulation must be rebooted, and that is a process that takes generations. Until then, the ocean waits. It waits in the dark, under the pressure of 3 miles of water, holding its breath, listening to the muffled creak of the icebergs drifting overhead, knowing that eventually, inevitably, the orbital clock will strike the hour of waking, the ice will melt, the fresh water will flush the system, and the great conveyor will roar back to life, inhaling the sky and exhaling the heat. But not yet. In this chapter of the story, the ocean is a sleeping giant, dreaming of a time before the ice, while the currents drift slowly, ever so slowly, through the silent, heavy corridors of the deep. As the ocean settles into its long, cold slumber, the change ripples upward, crossing the boundary between the waves and the wind, altering the very composition of the sky above. We move now to the third partner in this silent conspiracy. For the Ice Age is not merely a matter of ice on the land and cold in the water. It is a transformation of the invisible envelope that wraps the world. This is the deep storage of the air, a process where the atmosphere is slowly stripped of its warmth-trapping blanket, leaving the planet exposed to the raw, unfiltered gaze of the void. We take the air for granted, assuming that every breath we take is identical to the breath taken by the first ancestors. But the air is a living history, a recipe that changes with the seasons of the deep time. In the warm eras, the air is rich and thick with carbon dioxide, the invisible gas that acts as a thermal blanket, catching the heat radiating from the ground and holding it close to the Earth's skin. It is this gas that makes the difference between a frozen rock and a living garden. But when the Milankovitch cycles turn the key and the oceans cool, a profound chemistry begins to work in the surface waters. It is a simple rule of nature, observable in a glass of soda left on a table. Warm liquid lets its gas escape, bubbling up into the air, but cold liquid holds its gas tight, binding it within the fluid. As the global ocean cools, driven by the retreating sun and the expanding ice, it becomes a voracious sponge for carbon dioxide. The water becomes hungry for the sky. It inhales. The surface waters absorb the carbon from the atmosphere, dissolving it, pulling it down into the heavy, salty currents that we saw sinking into the abyss in the previous chapter. It is a planetary inhalation that lasts for thousands of years, a slow, deep breath that cleans the atmosphere of its insulating layer. Molecule by molecule, the carbon is stripped from the wind and locked away in the liquid dark. But the physical cooling is only half the story. The other half is written in the tiny, microscopic lives of the plankton. In the cold, dust-rich winds of the glacial age, the oceans are fertilized by iron blown from the dry continents, sparking vast blooms of life in the surface waters. These tiny creatures drink the carbon from the water to build their shells and their bodies, and when they die, they rain down into the depths, a ceaseless, silent snowfall of organic matter known as a marine snow. They carry the carbon with them, taking it out of circulation, burying it in the mud of the ocean floor. It is a biological pump, a mechanism of burial that works tirelessly to scrub the sky clean. Scientists still debate the exact balance between the physical cooling and this biological pumping, wondering which hand was stronger on the shovel. But the result is indisputable. The levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere plummet. They drop from the warm highs of the interglacial to the starving lows of the Ice Age, thinning the greenhouse effect until it is barely a sheet of gauze. The air becomes thinner in a thermal sense, less able to hold on to the heat of the day. This creates a clarity that is terrifying in its purity. The skies of the Ice Age are not the hazy, humid skies of summer. They are hard, crystalline, and impossibly clear. Without the humidity and the carbon to soften the light, the sun strikes the earth with a harsh, bright precision, and at night, the heat escapes instantly back into space. It is a world without insulation. Standing on a glacial plain under this thin air, you would feel the temperature drop like a stone the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the warmth vanishing as if a vacuum had sucked it away. This atmospheric thinning is the final lock on the door of the Ice Age. The orbital cycles started the cooling, the ice sheets amplified it, and the ocean cemented it. But the drop in carbon dioxide ensures that the cold is durable. It creates a stability that resists change. Even if the orbit wobbles slightly back toward warmth, the thin atmosphere cannot hold the heat long enough to melt the ice. The Earth is now trapped in a cold state, a stable equilibrium where the lack of greenhouse gases keeps the oceans cold, and the cold oceans keep absorbing the gases. It is a perfect, self-sustaining circle of storage. We might imagine the atmosphere of this time tasting different, sharp, metallic, lacking the heavy, swampy scent of a carbon-rich world. It is the air of the mountaintop brought down to sea level. The plants on the land struggle in this carbon famine, growing slower, their leaves narrowing, their breathing labored as they search for the scarce molecules they need to build their sugars. The forests retreat not just because of the cold, but because the air itself creates a poverty of resources. It is a hungry world, lean and efficient, where nothing is wasted and everything is conserved. The carbon that once floated freely in the wind, warming the backs of the dinosaurs, is now entombed in the limestone and the chalk at the bottom of the Atlantic, waiting. It waits with the patience of geology. It waits for the great overturning, for the day when the ocean will finally exhale and return the blanket to the sky. But during the glacial maximum, that day feels impossibly distant. The storage is deep and secure. The pressure of the water holds the gas in solution, pressing it into the dark fabric of the deep currents. We look up at the pale blue sky of the prehistory, a sky that looks innocent and empty, and we realize that its emptiness is its weapon. It has been stripped of its power to warm. The hidden machine has successfully dismantled the roof of the greenhouse, pane by pane, leaving the tenants exposed to the cosmic chill. There's a quiet violence in this chemistry, a stealing away of the breath of the planet, yet it is done so slowly that it feels like peace. The wind blows, the dust flies, and the ocean silently swallows the ghosts of the warm age, tucking them away in the library of the deep, leaving the stage set for the long, brittle silence of the ice. The air is clear, the view is endless, and the cold is absolute. For millions of years, the hidden machine turned in the dark, unobserved and unnamed, a ghost engine driving the climate through its vast, icy oscillations without a single witness to comprehend the logic of the gears. The mammoths felt the cold, the Neanderthals watched the glaciers advance, and the forests retreated in silence, but no one understood why. The mechanism was too large to be seen, its rhythm too slow to be felt by a heartbeat that lasts only a few decades. To see the pattern required a mind that could step outside of time, a perspective that could look down upon the solar system as if it were a clockwork toy on a table. And so, our story drifts forward, past the epics of stone and ice, past the rise of civilizations, to a quiet room in the city of Budapest in the early 20th century, where the Danube River flows heavy and gray beneath the window, carrying the debris of a continent at war. Here sits a man named Milankovitch. He is not a king or a general. He is a mathematician, a Serbian engineer, and technically, he is a prisoner. The year is 1914, and the world outside has erupted into the chaos of the First World War, a frenzy of borders and trenches and artillery fire. But inside this room, there is only the scratching of a pen on paper and the soft ticking of a clock. Milankovitch has been granted a strange mercy. Allowed to work in the library of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, he has turned his back on the burning world to solve a riddle that has nothing to do with nations and everything to do with the sun. He looks out at the Danube, watching the water curl and eddy around the bridge piers, and he sees a metaphor for the flow of time, fluid, continuous, yet governed by rigid laws of hydrodynamics. He wonders if the climate of the past flows the same way. At this time, the idea that ice ages were caused by orbital cycles is considered a fringe theory, a curiosity discussed by a few geologists, but largely dismissed as impossible to prove. The climate seems too chaotic, too wild to be tethered to the precise, sterile mathematics of astronomy. But Milutin believes in the geometry of the heavens. He believes that the Earth is not a chaotic beast, but a responsive planet, a body that obeys the strict instructions of gravity. And so, he begins to calculate. There are no computers to help him, no silicon chips to crunch the numbers of the celestial mechanics. There's only his mind, his slide rule, and the stacks of blank paper waiting to be filled with the dense, spiderweb scrawl of spherical trigonometry. He sets out to do something that seems impossible, to map the position of the Earth and the angle of the Sun for every latitude, looking back 600,000 years into the past. It is a task of crushing monotony, a marathon of multiplication and division that would break a lesser spirit. He must calculate the eccentricity, the obliquity, and the precession for thousands of specific moments in history, and then combine them to find the total solar radiation, the insolation, falling on the critical latitudes of the North. Day after day, while the cannons roar on the horizons of Europe, Milutin sits in the quiet dust of the library, traveling in his mind to the remote past. He calculates the sunlight falling on the 65th parallel 10,000 years ago, then 20,000, then 50,000. He works with the patience of a monk illuminating a manuscript, but instead of holy verses, he is transcribing the holy laws of motion. He begins to see the waves. On his graph paper, the numbers rise and fall in a rhythmic, undulating line. He sees the beat of the precession, the heave of the tilt, the long swell of the orbit. And then he sees them interfere. He watches the pen trace the line where the cycles align, where the tilt drops and the orbit stretches, and he sees the deep troughs of the energy curve, the solar vacuums where the summer heat vanishes. He realizes he is looking at the fingerprint of the ice ages. It must be a moment of profound, quiet ecstasy, sitting there in the dim light of the library, realizing that the chaotic storms of the past were actually singing a harmonious song, that the ice was dancing to a tune written by the gravity of Jupiter and the spin of the Earth. He is the first human being to truly see the machine. He is the watchmaker opening the back of the pocket watch and seeing the gears for the first time. He understands now that the great winter is not an accident, it is a mathematical certainty. He formulates the canon of insulation, a grand theory that links the celestial to the terrestrial, arguing that the summer sun at high latitudes is the conductor of the climate orchestra. He argues that the ice grows when the summer fails, a concept that contradicts the intuition of his peers who believe that cold winters are the key. He is alone in this conviction, a solitary figure holding a candle against the darkness of ignorance, insisting that the sun's angle is the master switch. The Danube flows on, indifferent to his discovery, just as the ice sheets flowed, indifferent to the herds they buried. Milankovitch works through the war, works through the peace, works through the changing of empires, never abandoning his calculations. He produces charts that look like heartbeats, jagged lines of peaks and valleys that represent the thermal history of the planet. To the uninitiated, they are just squiggles on a page, dry and academic, but to Milutin, they are landscapes. In the trough of the curve, he sees the woolly rhino plodding through the snow. In the peak of the curve, he sees the hippopotamus swimming in the Thames. He has translated the geography of time into the language of mathematics. It is a testament to the power of the human mind to find order in the apparent chaos of nature. He is not an explorer with a machete hacking through the jungle. He is an explorer with a pencil, hacking through the thicket of deep time to find the hidden path. He writes about the distant sun and the unsteady earth with a poetic precision, treating the planet with the tenderness of a biographer. He knows that his work may not be accepted in his lifetime, and indeed, it is met with skepticism, for the geological evidence is messy and incomplete, unable to confirm his precise predictions. But he does not waver. He trusts the math more than he trusts the mud. He knows that gravity does not lie. If the Earth moved this way, then the sunlight must have changed. And if the sunlight changed, the ice must have responded. It is a faith in the rationality of the universe. As we imagine him there, rubbing his tired eyes, the oil lamp burning low, we feel a strange kinship with this man who sought to understand the bedtime history of the Earth itself. He is the narrator who found the plot. He realized that the story of the planet was not a random series of events, but a structured narrative with chapters defined by the stars. The paper stacks up on his desk, a paper tower of Babel reaching toward the truth, and outside, the seasons turn, the leaves fall into the river, the snow covers the bridges, and the spring melts it away, a living demonstration of the very cycles he is capturing in ink. He is capturing the breath of the world. He is freezing the motion of the solar system onto a two-dimensional plane so that we might see it. The Milankovitch Cycles are named for him not because he created them, but because he heard them when everyone else was deaf to the rhythm. He listened to the silence of the past and heard the ticking of the clock. And so, the section ends with him sitting by the window, the calculation finished for the night, watching the stars come out over the darkened city, knowing that each one of them is a sun and that any planet circling them would be subject to the same laws, the same wandering, the same eternal dance of ice and fire. He has found the universal heartbeat, and in the quiet of the room, he feels the peace of a question answered, a mystery solved, even if the world is not yet ready to believe him. There is a profound difference between the clean, silent perfection of a mathematical equation and the noisy, chaotic reality of a thunderstorm. And it was in this gap between the ideal and the real that Milankovitch found himself waiting, a solitary figure standing on the bridge between astronomy and meteorology. He had calculated the orbital mechanics with the precision of a diamond cutter, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the sunlight reaching the Earth varied in a predictable rhythm. But the Earth is not a smooth, gray billiard ball reacting obediently to the touch of the sun. It is a messy, breathing, living organism wrapped in a volatile envelope of gases and water vapor that we call the atmosphere. And the most unpredictable ghost in this machine is the cloud. To the critics of the early 20th century, the climate system seemed too wild, too tempestuous to be ruled by the gentle, slow-moving hand of gravity. They looked out their windows at the swirling gales, the sudden blizzards, and the unpredictable droughts, and they saw chaos, not order. They argued that the atmosphere was a beast with a mind of its own, driven by internal furies, volcanoes erupting ash, ocean currents shifting their beds, magnetic poles wandering, rather than by the distant delicate mechanics of the orbit. The effect is too small, they whispered in the lecture halls, shaking their heads over Milutin's charts. The change in sunlight is merely a candle flickering in a hurricane. How could such a tiny shift trigger the freezing of a continent? It was a valid question, a reasonable doubt born of the sheer complexity of the world. Clouds, after all, are the great tricksters of the sky. Low, thick clouds reflect the sun and cool the earth, acting like the ice mirror, while high, thin wisps of cirrus trap the heat and warm the planet. They are fleeting, ephemeral, forming and dissolving in minutes, defying the long, slow logic of the 100,000-year cycles. How could a mathematician predict the ice when he could not even predict the rain next Tuesday? This was the chaos of clouds, the stumbling block that kept the Milankovitch theory from being fully embraced. The scientists of the time lacked the tools to see the feedback loops, the hidden amplifiers that we now understand. They did not yet know how the carbon dioxide would drop to thin the blanket, or how the sea ice would stop the ocean pump. They saw only the raw input of the sun, and to them it looked insufficient. Milankovitch was asking them to believe that a slight leaning of the axis was powerful enough to build a mile-high wall of ice, and without the knowledge of the amplifiers, it felt like claiming a butterfly could push a boulder up a hill. And so, the theory remained in a kind of scientific purgatory, respected for its elegance but doubted for its power. There is a sadness in this era of the story, a sense of a truth that is waiting to be heard but is drowned out by the noise of the immediate. The geological evidence available at the time was also messy and confusing. Geologists were digging into the moraines, the piles of rubble left behind by ancient glaciers, but these piles were jumbled, eroded by rain and wind, a library where the pages had been torn out and shuffled. One valley might show 3 ice ages, another might show 4. The dates were fuzzy, reliant on guesswork and relative positioning rather than the atomic precision of modern chemistry. It was impossible to line up the rocks with the math. The timeline of the mud did not match the timeline of the stars. Milankovitch, however, remained stoic, a man possessed of a quiet, unshakable patience that mirrored the very cycles he studied. He wrote, "I do not think I am wrong. I think the earth is slow to reveal its secrets." He understood that the chaos was superficial, a layer of noise over a deep, resonant signal. He compared the climate to a man walking a dog. The dog, the weather, runs back and forth, sniffing at bushes, chasing squirrels, looking chaotic and unpredictable. But ultimately, the dog must follow the path of the man, the orbit. The path is the destiny. The running is just the detail. But it is hard to see the path when you are watching the dog. As the decades passed, the world moved on. Milutin grew old. The wars ended and began again. The scientific community turned its eyes to the atom and the rocket, fascinated by the sudden explosive powers of physics, leaving the slow, sleepy science of paleoclimatology in the shadows. It seemed for a time that the Milankovitch cycles would be forgotten, filed away as a beautiful but incorrect hypothesis, a Victorian curiosity that failed to explain the rugged reality of the Pleistocene. We can imagine him in his later years, perhaps walking by the Danube again, watching the clouds drift over the water, those same clouds that his critics said were too chaotic to master. He might have wondered if he had missed something, if the machine was indeed broken, or if the earth was simply too wild to be tamed by geometry. There's a profound humility in doing work that you may never see vindicated, in planting a tree whose fruit will not ripen until long after you are gone. He died in 1958, a time when his theory was still debated, still hovering on the edge of acceptance, neither fully proven nor fully discarded. He passed into the history of science without the fanfare of a Nobel Prize, leaving behind his canon of insulation as a message in a bottle, cast into the sea of time. The chaos of clouds seemed to have won. The atmosphere kept its secrets. The ice ages remained a mystery, attributed to vague terrestrial causes or random fluctuations. But the machine was still turning. The orbit was still stretching. The signal was there, buried not in the jumbled rocks of the valleys, but in a place no one had yet thought to look, in the deep, pristine, unblemished archives of the ice itself. High on the Greenland plateau and deep in the frozen heart of Antarctica, the snow had been falling for 1,000,000 years, layer upon gentle layer, trapping the air, trapping the dust, trapping the ghosts of the past climates in tiny bubbles of atmosphere. This was the library that would eventually verify the math, but the library was locked, buried under 2 miles of frost, waiting for a drill that had not yet been invented. The story of science is often told as a march of triumph, but here it feels more like a vigil, a long night of waiting where the truth is kept alive by a single flame in a dark room. The order was there, hidden in the chaos, waiting for the human eye to sharpen enough to see it. The clouds were not enemies of the theory. They were part of the machine, amplifiers that turned the orbital whisper into a climatic shout, but it would take another generation of thinkers to decipher their language. And so, the theory slept, just as the spores of a fern sleep under the snow, waiting for the right season to bloom. It drifted through the academic winter, preserved by its own mathematical beauty, waiting for the thaw that would come not from the sun, but from the ice itself. It is fitting, perhaps, that the proof of the theory lay hidden within the very substance that the theory sought to explain, buried deep in the white, silent heart of the cryosphere, where the wind never stops blowing and the sun circles the horizon without setting. For decades, the answer to the riddle of the ages was sleeping beneath the boots of explorers who trudged across the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, unaware that they were walking on top of the most complete library in the solar system. The ice sheets are not merely frozen water. They are scrolls of parchment, written year by year, layer by layer, preserving the history of the sky with a fidelity that rock and soil can never match. Every snowflake that falls carries a tiny sample of the atmosphere it fell through, dust from a distant volcano, sea salt from a stormy ocean, and most miraculously, tiny bubbles of air trapped between the crystals as the snow is compressed into ice. These bubbles are time capsules, microscopic museums that hold the actual breath of the world as it was 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 years ago. It was not until the middle of the 20th century, long after Milankovitch had put down his pen, that humanity developed the technology to unlock this vault. We built drills, great hollow needles of steel capable of biting into the glacier and extracting a continuous column of ice, a long, translucent cylinder of frozen time that could be pulled up into the light of the modern day. Imagine the scene on the high plateau, the roar of the generator, the biting cold of the wind, the scientists huddled in their parkas, watching as the core barrel comes up from the dark, slick and shining, holding a rod of ice that is as clear as glass and as heavy as history. There is a sense of sacred violation in this act, a piercing of the planetary memory. But what it revealed changed everything. When these cores were taken back to the laboratories, cold rooms kept at freezing temperatures so the evidence would not melt away, and analyzed, the ice began to speak. The scientists melted the layers, measuring the ratio of oxygen atoms, looking for the chemical signature of the cold. They crushed the bubbles, releasing the ancient air to measure the carbon dioxide. And as they plotted the data on a graph, a rhythm emerged from the noise. It was a rhythm of slow, undulating waves, a rising and falling of temperature and gas that moved with a majestic, mechanical regularity. They laid this new graph of the ice beside the old graph of the math, the handwritten curves that Milankovitch had drawn by the Danube, and the silence in the room must have been profound. They matched. The peaks of the ice lined up with the peaks of the orbit. The valleys of the cold lined up with the valleys of the sunlight. The heartbeat found in the physical body of the Earth was the exact same heartbeat that had been calculated in the abstract mind of the mathematician. It was the Rosetta Stone of the climate, ED. The ice confirmed that the hidden machine was real, that the planet was indeed dancing to the music of the spheres. This discovery, cemented in a landmark paper in the 1970s, famously titled Variations in the Earth's Orbit, Pacemaker of the Ice Ages, was a moment of vindication that rippled through the scientific world, transforming the study of the past from a guessing game into a precise science. We realized that the Earth is not a chaotic wanderer, but a meticulous timekeeper, recording its own journey with the precision of a clock. The ice cores revealed the 100,000-year pulse of the eccentricity, the 41,000-year beat of the tilt, and the 23,000-year flutter of the precession, all woven together into a complex harmonic signal that dictated the fate of the biosphere. We could see the sharp, jagged sawtooth pattern of the climate, the slow, agonizing descent into the deep freeze that lasts for tens of thousands of years, followed by the sudden rapid warming of the termination where the ice melts quickly as the orbital cycles align to pour heat onto the poles. It is a pattern that looks like a slow inhalation and a sharp exhalation, a breathing cycle that is repeated again and again for millions of years. To look at an ice core is to look at a ghost. You are seeing the actual water that fell on the back of a mammoth, the actual air that a Neanderthal breathed, frozen in a state of suspended animation. There is a terrible beauty in this preservation, a reminder that nothing is truly lost in the closed system of the Earth. It is only stored, waiting to be remembered. The bubbles in the ice, when released, make a faint popping sound, the crackle of the past, as the pressurized air expands back into the room. It is the sound of an ancient atmosphere escaping its prison, a whisper from a world that no longer exists. This verification brought a sense of order to our understanding of our home. We are not drifting blindly through a chaotic universe. We are part of a system, a grand, repeating structure that operates on timescales that dwarf our civilizations. The ice cores taught us humility. They showed us that the stable climate we built our cities in is actually a rare anomaly, a brief warm peak in a landscape dominated by the cold valleys of the ice. They showed us that the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane, march in lockstep with the temperature, rising and falling as the oceans breathe in and out, confirming the feedback loops that Milankovitch could only guess at. The library of frozen time is still being read today. We are drilling deeper, reaching back further, past the last ice age, past the one before that, aiming for ice that is 1,000,000 years old, seeking to understand the mid-Pleistocene transition when the heartbeat of the world shifted its tempo. But the core lesson remains. The machine is real. The connection between the star and the stone is absolute. The ice does not lie. It holds the memory of the winter in its crystal lattice, a cold, hard fact that survived the melting of the ages, to tell us that we are creatures of the orbit, born of the wobble, living by the grace of a tilt that happens to be just right. The vindication of Milutin is complete, not in a statue or a monument, but in the acceptance of his vision as the foundational truth of deep-time history. The narrator of the prehistoric world has been found, and his voice is the quiet, steady dripping of melting ice in a laboratory, counting out the seconds of the geological clock. The ice does not vanish all at once. It loosens its grip slowly, almost reluctantly, as if unsure whether this warmth can be trusted. Valleys that were once silent beneath kilometers of frozen weight begin to breathe again. Meltwater finds ancient paths, carving channels that remember rivers long gone. The air softens. The wind carries moisture instead of knives. Light lingers longer on the horizon, no longer reflecting only from white, endless surfaces, but sinking into dark soil, into water, into living skin. This is the interglacial. Not an ending, not a victory, but a pause. To those who live within it, the interglacial feels permanent. Forests return with confidence. Grasslands stretch across continents. Animals follow green corridors northward, step by step, generation by generation, unaware that they are moving across a temporary gift of warmth. Ice sheets retreat toward the poles, leaving behind stones scratched by pressure older than memory, leaving behind landscapes shaped by absence. From the perspective of a human lifetime, this warmth feels stable. From the perspective of deep time, it is fleeting, a single breath between long silences. The planet does not announce this transition. There is no signal, no clear boundary between glacial and interglacial worlds. The change arrives through accumulation, summers that linger just long enough, winters that fail to rebuild what they once commanded. Snow melts a little earlier. Ice thins by fractions that only gravity can measure. Over thousands of years, the balance tips, not because cold has been defeated, but because geometry has shifted. Above, the hidden machine continues its work. The axis straightens slightly. The wobble changes its orientation. The orbit relaxes, becoming rounder, less extreme. Summer sunlight, especially in the high latitudes, grows strong enough to erase winter's work. Ice retreats not because it is pushed, but because it is no longer reinforced. The feedback loops reverse. Dark land absorbs light instead of reflecting it. Oceans breathe out carbon that was once locked away in their depths. The air thickens gently, invisibly, holding more warmth each year. Life responds. Forests creep into territories once claimed by tundra. Soil deepens. Insects hum where silence once ruled. Rivers stabilize, no longer rerouted by ice dams or glacial floods. The planet settles into a rhythm that feels to its inhabitants like balance. But it is not balance. It is a temporary alignment, 3 silent gears no longer locked against the sun. For early humans, this pause becomes possibility. Paths open across land bridges exposed by lowered seas, then close again as waters rise. Game becomes abundant, then shifts its routes. Fire burns differently in warmer air. Stone tools adapt. Language deepens. Memory begins to stretch beyond seasons, beyond single migrations. The interglacial does not create intelligence, but it gives intelligence room to grow. Still, even here, the past remains close. Glaciers linger in mountain shadows. Ice caps watch from afar. Cold sleeps beneath the surface, waiting. The planet has learned, over hundreds of cycles, that warmth is never final. The same forces that loosen ice will eventually invite it back, not out of malice, not out of punishment, but because motion continues. The interglacial is not the opposite of an ice age. It is part of the same sentence. Milankovitch's equations do not stop at warmth. They move forward, calmly, predicting the slow decline of summer intensity thousands of years ahead. Left alone, the machine would eventually guide Earth back toward another glacial state. Snow would begin to survive again in northern latitudes. Ice would grow where summer weakens. The long exhalation would return. But this interglacial is different. For the first time in the planet's long memory, a new force moves faster than orbit, faster than tilt, faster than wobble. Carbon rises not over millennia but centuries. Heat accumulates not by geometry but by chemistry. The ancient machine still turns, but it now shares the stage with a presence that did not exist in any previous cycle. Yet even this disruption unfolds within the deeper rhythm. The planet absorbs shocks. Oceans buffer extremes. Ice responds slowly, not to moments but to trends. The Milankovitch cycles do not break. They wait. Their timelines stretch far beyond urgency, far beyond fear. They remind the world that while change can be accelerated, it cannot be escaped. The interglacial remains a pause even now. Night falls differently in this warmer age. Firelight flickers against cave walls painted by hands that know seasons, that sense patterns without naming them. Outside, the wind carries pollen instead of snow. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent, tracing paths that will shift so slowly no eye will ever notice, except through memory written in ice and stone and mathematics. What feels like stability is, in truth, a moment of alignment. The planet does not rest here. It simply inhales. And somewhere far above, beyond clouds and weather, beyond warmth and cold, the Earth continues its quiet movements, leaning, stretching, wobbling, keeping time not in years but in ages. The night deepens, but nothing truly sleeps. Above the drifting clouds, beyond the reach of wind and weather, the Earth continues its motion, unhurried, precise, obedient to forces older than oceans. It circles its star along a path that subtly stretches and relaxes. It leans just enough to shape the fate of ice and forest. It wobbles, slowly redirecting the seasons across the long calendar of the sky. These movements do not pause for warmth or cold. They do not respond to fear, hope, or urgency. They simply continue. This is the machine. Not a device of metal or sound, but of geometry and gravity. A mechanism without intention, yet capable of remaking continents. It has no beginning that can be witnessed, no ending that can be reached. Long before memory, it turned. Long after voices fade, it will still turn. Ice has come and gone beneath its rhythm many times already. Sheets kilometers thick once pressed the land into silence, then withdrew as gently as they arrived. Seas fell and rose, deserts bloomed and vanished, species adapted, migrated, or disappeared, leaving only traces folded into sediment. Each cycle felt complete to those living within it. Each was only a chapter. From the machine's perspective, nothing is ever final. Even now, in this warm pause, the same rules apply. The planet continues to lean, to wobble, to circle. The timing of sunlight at high latitudes is already changing, almost imperceptibly, year by year. Summer grows infinitesimally weaker in some places, stronger in others. Snowfall patterns shift in ways too subtle to feel, yet real enough to measure. The seeds of future cold do not announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, like dust. The machine does not promise another ice age soon. It promises only continuity. What makes this knowledge unsettling is not the return of ice, but the certainty of motion. There will always be another alignment, another moment when the silent gears click into place, another slow descent into cold, if nothing intervenes, or another delay, stretched by forces introduced in the brief blink of human time. Yet, even disruption exists within limits. The Milankovitch cycles remind the planet how to recover from extremes. They have guided Earth through snowball states and greenhouse worlds alike. They do not prevent catastrophe, but they soften it, spreading change across tens of thousands of years instead of moments. They are the long memory of the climate system, ensuring that nothing remains locked forever. To imagine this is to step outside urgency. Here, time is not measured by alarms or calendars. It is measured by ice advancing the width of a hand over centuries. by forests migrating one valley north over 1,000 generations, by stars shifting their guardianship of the pole so slowly that myths are born and forgotten before the change is complete. The machine asks nothing of those who live beneath it. It does not require belief or understanding. It does not punish ignorance or reward insight. It simply moves, carrying continents, climates, and lives along with it. And yet, there is comfort here, in knowing that the world is not chaotic, even when it feels unstable, in knowing that beneath storms, beneath droughts, beneath sudden change, there exists a deeper order, one that has guided the planet through far worse than any single age could imagine. Ice ages did not end life. They reshaped it. Warm periods did not erase hardship. They redistributed it. Nothing is static. Nothing is lost without leaving something behind. As sleep draws closer, the mind no longer needs to follow every calculation, every cycle. It is enough to sense the rhythm, to feel the slow turning beneath thought, to imagine the earth as it truly is, not fragile, not eternal, but resilient through motion. The stars continue their watch, the planet continues its dance. Ice will return one day, or it will be delayed. Forests will spread or retreat. Seas will rise, then fall again. None of this is rushed, none of it is personal. It is simply the continuation of a story written in angles and orbits, in light and shadow. The machine turns without an end. And beneath it, life rests, knowing, even in sleep, that the rhythm will carry everything forward just as it always has.